Hi, this is Andre Koen. I want to say thank you so much for joining this class, and thank you so much for your patience with me. Sometimes schedules and technology don't always work the way we want them to, but I want to say thank you so much for hanging out with me. And in this session, we're going to talk a little bit about how do we start to develop our DEI acumen? So, how do we get to a place where we feel like we can be effective ultimately, right? Because effectiveness is what we're after. We're not trying to be uh, protocol police. We're not trying to monitor people's behaviors, their thoughts, those things. What we're looking for is how do we become effective in making sure that the services that we provide match the needs of our stakeholders, i.e., our community, right? So that's what we're after. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do we prioritize and what do we prioritize in terms of DEIA efforts. We'll talk a little bit about how do we get that buy-in and how do we maintain those relationships, because one of the things we know is that retention strategies are the best are the best for building organizations that last, right? So it's very important that we figure out how to maintain some of those gains that we get. So we'll talk about that as well, and then I'll share a little bit about the case study, and I'll make sure that I send you that that audio file case study, so you'll be getting that. So first, let's start talking about this notion of prioritizing. And one of the things that we must recognize is that if we don't measure things, if we don't count things, one might argue that they don't matter, right? And so prioritizing is extremely important. And so what that means in our organizations is very different, right? So for some of us, it means that we allot, that there's monies allotted to recruitment strategies, to program development. For others of us, it is paying attention to building relationships. And we'll talk more about relationships a little bit later. But this notion that these things are important. And so counting them, logging them is one way to show its importance. Another is paying consistent attention. Provides us a sense of its priority, right? So where energy goes, where attention goes, energy flows, right? That kind of concept. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do we prioritize and focus on our employees. So it's important that we have metrics, that we have pulse surveys, that we have listening sessions that have a focus on being effective, right? That these listening sessions have a purpose. We're not just listening to listen. We're not just surveying to survey, but we're using this information to help us prioritize what are the relationships that we need to be building with our employees, right? And so part of that is making sure that we not only have those conversations, but they become the baseline for us to look at how we do this over time, right? So, so again, wherever you're starting is fine, but let that be your starting point, right? So your baseline becomes wherever you are. And so some folks will say, well, we haven't had a diversity strategy or a diversity initiative up until this point. Well, at the point you start is the point that we'll start to measure. And the funny thing is, lots of organizations get caught up in how they measure against other organizations. And I would say as you get more sophisticated, those may be some things that you want to do. But particularly for those of us who are just starting, measuring ourselves against ourselves is our best measure of success. All right. So what are the attitudes, the beliefs, how comfortable people feel in our environment measured against ourselves is the best benchmark for success for us. Now, as we get more sophisticated, we can start engaging in. Sometimes there are these organizational surveys that ask us to measure ourselves against other organizations, and there are prizes, if you will, for measuring up or competing with other organizations. I would say for those of us who are just starting, that's very premature, and so really focus on your own organizational process, and make sure that we embed these concepts of DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, into our already into things that we're already doing. Right, so we put on this. Sometimes people will call it an equity lens or a diversity lens. So we start thinking about not necessarily. And remember, we talked about this notion of inclusion isn't necessarily doing extra things, but including DEIA strategies in what we already do. All right, so maximizing things that we already do, as opposed to going out and having to do new initiatives or new points. So, and that's how we get to a place where we can get support, because we're not asking for these special initiatives. We're not asking to do things that are unique or outside of the character of the organization. We just want to add a lens to what we're currently doing so that we can start measuring and looking for ways to build better and stronger relationships with DEIA as a priority in our organization. So there's that. And so when we start to think about this notion of getting buy-in, not only from our organizations, but from our employees, you're going to hear this theme today: relationship, right? And so when we start thinking about how to get this buy-in, it's very important that we start with our employees, and more importantly, that we start with our organizational values. Are our employees clear about what our organizational values are? Are they clear about what our mission is? And so, and then our questions then become: how are you able to, as an employee, see examples of leadership living those values or aligning to that mission? And what is the culture of our organization as it relates to those values and seeing alignment with the mission of the organization, right? So when we have these roundtable discussions, these should be kind of the starting questions before we get into even talking about DEIA as it relates to our organization, but really being clear about those values and the mission of our organization is critical for developing that buy-in, because if we don't have a common touchstone, what are we doing in the organization, right? If we're not in a position where we can see that as our common space. All right. So that's extremely important as we move into having those discussions. And so I want to jump into kind of the 5 points of getting buy-in. Right? So first is to empower your employees' voice. So to be able to allow them spaces to give and receive feedback that is productive. I will also say that the dissenting voice is an important voice to have. So those voices that say, well, maybe things aren't always as rosy or peachy as they could be, and here is a perspective that I'd like to give to help us move forward, right? So this notion of the dissenting voice is extremely important. So that's how you start to empower employees. you embrace the customer experience. And so not only are we thinking about our employees, that we actually have two sets of customers, if you will, right? So there are internal customers and there are external customers. And so how do we get feedback? What is the relationship with those internal and external customers like? And so again, having ways to get feedback, to deliver feedback, having stay interviews, right? I know a lot of organizations, as they get more sophisticated, are doing these stay interviews. So what is it about our organization that causes you to want to be here? For that creates, what kind of environment are we creating where longevity is the norm? Right, so those are some important pieces to kind of consider. And also focus on building trust. And again, trust isn't something that you just say. Trust is something that is built, that is cultivated over time, and it is, again, alignment with our values and our mission. And so when we have that alignment, we can start to build trust. And so having these difficult and conversations can be very helpful in making sure that we're building trust as we align with our values and our mission. And then number 5 is really think like a brand, right? And so when we think of our favorite brands, some of the big box stores, there are some things that make them distinctive and differentiate themselves in the market, right? So not just the logos, but the feel, the atmosphere, the i.e. spirit of the place, right? Really is marked by their ability to connect that with their identity. And so when we think of our organizations, particularly in government and nonprofits, we also whether we've determined it or not, we have a brand, right? So our customers, our community members, they see us as a brand, and whether we're cultivating that brand or whether they're cultivating that brand is up to us, right? And so I would always say, if we can create that message, that becomes really important, right? So and how do we do that? So we build loyalty, we communicate, we share information, we're proactive in interacting with our communities. And then that allows us to come to a place where we start to kind of maintain the gain, right? And so how do we do that? Again, I said before, if we're not measuring things, if we're not looking for a return on investment, if we're not engaging our community in conversations, then we can't maintain what we have. Because what we want is success that we can replicate, right? So it is arguable if McDonald's makes the best hamburger. But what I will say is, if I go to any McDonald's within, and I haven't gone to many outside the States, but any McDonald's within the continental US, I can be guaranteed that it will have the pretty much the same taste and flavor that I'm anticipating when I go to a McDonald's restaurant. Now, they're not paying for this. I'm not getting any kickbacks, but I think you get the point, right? So this notion of a franchise is that it has these successes that can be replicated. Right. And so that's what we're after. And so when we think about that, it's important that we capture data, that we present the data, that we talk about the data that we have, that we use that data to help us leverage decision making, right? So we're not just trying to point out, create halos or horns. We're actually trying to use this information to help us make better decisions. And so we can use that data, and that data can inform our goals, right? So setting diversity goals to create accountability and increase follow through. One of the things that oftentimes happens is fatigue, because people are in this kind of social justice warrior position. And I have to tell you, that is a tiring space to be in if you don't have actionable goals, if you don't have these small steps that keep you encouraged or keep one encouraged, right? So those are important things to recognize. And lastly, use social norms, right? I believe that positive peer pressure is a tool that we can oftentimes use. We can recognize that how we communicate with or how we allow our employees to communicate, or our customers in our community to communicate with us is very good. So what that means is, partly what that means is I go to where they are, right? Both metaphorically and physically. Right? So if I have folks who are doing street maintenance or whatnot, I go to the shop if we're going to have some conversations or some training, right? I don't necessarily make them come downtown, if you will. We go out to where they are, and we use that data. We use those relationships to maximize the potential of our workforce. The last thing that I'll share before we talk a little bit about the case study is making sure that we keep the main thing the main thing. And too often we can get sidetracked into other ways of engaging. We can get sidetracked in other ways of thinking. And lose sight of what is important and what is valuable as it pertains to DEI efforts. And so, again, I think that mission, those values are important to align. So with that, we'll wrap up our time. What I'll also have you do is in the Google form, just share some of your thoughts about how you might use this last bit of information to develop your DEI acumen, so that you become an individual, or you start to create an organization where these things become a part of what you do all the time. And the case study, I'll have a few questions for the case study. And thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your interest in this topic and for serving our communities. My name is Andre Koen, and I want to say thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye.